Chapter 1001, I am Deng Shintong. Zhang Yi did not run fast, and he was not a mutant known for his physical strength. However, after just a few seconds, the great immortal Hongwan caught up to him. Flash! The great immortal Hongwan leapt high into the air, his gaze cold and focused on Zhang Yi's neck. The Guoguang Longzong in his hand burst forth like a silver vase, emitting dazzling white light. The sword was so fast that the naked eye could not see it, and it had become a form of light. Pop! A faint ripple appeared in the air. Daisen Hongwan and Zhang Yi passed by each other sideways and landed on the ground. He glanced at the long sword in his hand, and not a single drop of blood was stained on it. He nodded with satisfaction, and then skillfully sheathed his sword. His sword was so fast that the person he had killed had not even realized it before he died. It was so fast that not even a drop of blood had been left on the blade. This is too weak. He doesn't look like a high-level mutant from the Huashu Kingdom, he might just be a member of the reconnaissance unit. Daishin Hongwan turned his head to see the corpse slowly fall. But when he turned back, the person in front of him had suddenly disappeared. What? Daijin Hongwan's pupils narrowed slightly. Impossible. The sword had clearly been swung, and the opponent definitely hadn't dodged. But why was there no corpse? Oh? It seems that this mutant has some ability? He clenched his sword in his hand, and once again, a fluctuation came from the depths of the poisonous miasma. Daijin Hongwan vaguely saw the figure just now running away into the distance. I really don't know what kind of trick you're playing. A cold smile appeared at the corner of Daishin Hongwan's mouth. Zhang Yi's actions had instead aroused an evil sense of fun in him. Do you really want to live so badly? Then let me extinguish your hope. I like nothing better than to watch those people struggle desperately to stay alive, only to end up helpless and desperate when I kill them. He was not afraid of the other party's plots and schemes. Because in the face of absolute strength, all plots and schemes are meaningless. As the #1 strong man in Neon, there were only a handful of people on the entire Star Island who could kill him. Even if he encountered the supreme existences of the Four Spirits or the Lock of Hell, if he couldn't defeat them, he would still have a chance to escape. And from the way this person had behaved since the beginning, it was impossible that he was some supreme master. A true strong person would not hide in secret, and would never flee the first time they were discovered. Dai God Hongwan crouched down, pressing his right hand against Kunikich Nagamune, and with his right foot, he stamped down on the ground and chased after him like an arrow. But this time, it was not as simple for him to chase after Zhang Yi. Zhang Yi activated 30x spatial acceleration, increasing his speed to extremely fast. Dai God Hongwan chased after him relentlessly, unwilling to give up a reward point that was within his grasp. The Columbia Navy had a list of rewards. From the captain of the ship, the captain of the investigation team, to the vice captain and even the ordinary team members, all had a price tag. He would not let go of the fat in his hands. I hope you're best a captain-level mutant, so I can get more rewards too. Daishin Hongwan thought excitedly as he chased after him. The chase between the two did not last long, and after a few minutes, they had run tens of kilometers. Zhang Yi's footsteps suddenly stopped in the middle of a field of ruins. Daishin Hongwan stood behind him, sneering, "What, can't you run anymore? No matter where you run today, I will personally take your head." His eyes were full of mockery, as if he were a cat who had caught a fleeing mouse. From his breathing, it could be seen that he still had some strength left. Yes, he enjoyed the thrill of hunting his prey as it desperately tried to escape while he slowly toyed with it and savaged it. Zhang Yi turned around and faced the great god Hongwan. Is it possible that you are alone? And I deliberately lured you here, Zhang Yi said calmly. In his right hand, he took out a long sword made of Edmund metal. The great god Hongwan's eyes widened with laughter at this sight. You want to compare swords with me, is that it? Very well, ha ha ha. He laughed heartily, but never took his eyes off Zhang Yi for a moment. After laughing enough, he narrowed his eyes and said in a teasing tone, "And how do you know that I wasn't lured here on purpose? Although the source spirit is delicious, the reward for killing a captain-level mutant is also very high. I don't want to share it with anyone. Zhang Yi pointed the long sword in his hand at the head of the great god Huan. You are being presumptuous. If you knew who I was, I believe you would not have the courage to speak to me in this way. The great god Huan looked at Zhang Yi with interest. So, who are you? Zhang Yi laughed, and then the laughter grew louder and louder. Listen carefully, you despicable neon dwarf. I am the unquenchable star of hope in the Jiangnan region, the eternal glory of the Huashu kingdom, and the most amazing genius in Blizzard City. Captain of the Heavenly God Squad, Deng Shintong. Deng Shintong was slightly taken aback. Deng Shintong? He had heard of this name before, when the Ronin organization Moon of Erosion had previously landed in the Jiangnan region. It was said that Deng Shintong had once defeated a captain in the Jiangnan region. He had followed him on this mission, but his strength was not conspicuous among the many mutants. A trace of contempt appeared in the eyes of Daikami Benimru. So you're just a little punk. As he finished speaking, he drew his sword. His speed was fast, and the speed of his sword was even faster. They were more than 10 meters apart, but in the blink of an eye, he had traversed the distance. The sword light flashed, but the space in front of him was distorted. He watched as his sword cut into nothingness, and the person in front of him had suddenly disappeared. The next moment, a gash opened up on his back. A black flame, like a half-moon, fiercely slashed down on his back. Dai God Benimuru only felt a chill down his back. His sword was already out of its sheath, and he couldn't quickly turn around to fight back. But as a master of the sword and a practitioner of practical martial arts, he instantly drew his sword to defend. Boom! The blade of the void slammed down on his sword sheath with a loud bang, unleashing a sky-shattering might. Although Daishin Huan managed to block the blow, he was caught off guard and was still sent flying hundreds of meters away. This power! You are not Deng Shintong. Daishin Huan reacted instantly and yelled angrily. He was angry because he had been deceived. When Zhang Yi introduced himself, he believed that Zhang Yi was Deng Shintong. Because in his opinion, a master would not bother concealing his identity. Either he would not say anything, or he would introduce himself. Who would be so shameless as to come up and say that they were someone else? If anyone is to blame, it is only because he met Zhang Yi too late, otherwise he would have learned his lesson a long time ago. Chapter 1002, I have seen through. Zhang Yi dealt a blow that made the great god Huan suffer a silent loss. Although he managed to block the sword that Zhang Yi had sneaked up behind him with, the powerful power of the void still made his hands start to tingle, and he even felt a stirring within his body. What powerful strength! Among the two major regions of the Huashu kingdom, there are not many people who can force me back with a single sword. And there is only one person with the ability to manipulate space. You are Jiangnan's chaos, aren't you? The great god Huan felt as if he were facing a great enemy. In recent times, chaos had become very famous on Star Island. Especially after he had killed members of the infernal chain, including Thor, the god of thunder, and Euler, the god of hunting. His name had cast a huge shadow over everyone in the Allied forces. That was why General Horn had offered a reward of 5 billion Columbia Standard units for anyone who could hunt him down. Dioscuri could not help but feel excited at the thought of the huge reward. But then he thought about the opponent's terrifying strength, and his muscles tensed. This battle was quite dangerous for him. Fortunately, he was not alone and had help nearby. Dioscuri immediately communicated with Umi Shio. Susanoo, the person we met was Chaos. Quickly call Medusa over, the three of us will surround and kill him, there is a good chance we can kill him. Compared to his bounty points, those source spirits are nothing. However, the female tidal wave replied, just a moment, we can't get away from here for the time being. Daijin Benimuru froze for a moment. Wasn't it just about surrounding and killing a group of source spirits? What was there to get away from? At that moment, the Great Tide Girl and Medusa were indeed in a tough battle. At first, they thought that the big chinchilla, which they had thought was very easy to deal with, had shown off its terrifying fighting power. When it opened its arms like a giant bear, an endless ice and snowstorm erupted from its body. Dai Haichao leapt out of the way of the surging ice and snow, frowned, and muttered, "This thing, was it really created by the source of God? But why do I feel that it's like a mutant? At the very least, it has combat skills that are no less than those of a mutant." Dai Haichao told Medusa about the appearance of chaos. At this, Medusa also became serious. "He's here too." The news of Zhang Yi's appearance shook the temporary command center of the Columbia Navy. General Horn immediately called all the officers over and focused their attention entirely on this battlefield. Chaos appeared northwest of Misty Valley. This dangerous guy, I knew he couldn't stand the loneliness. General Horn's eyes were filled with murderous intent. Chaos, who had killed 2 members of the Hell's Lock, was undoubtedly a thorn in their side. He must be eliminated to maintain the dignity of the Columbia Navy. He immediately gave orders to Christina, and also used Neon's communication channels to tell the Great God Red Pills and the Great Tide Girl to cooperate with Christina. 3 against 1, this will give us the initiative on the battlefield. If necessary, use Compound X to corner him. General Horn's cold eyes radiated a terrifying light. He is one of the most dangerous guys on Star Island. Christina and Taiji received orders from the command center, and they were also very helpless at the moment. They had successfully angered the big chinchilla, who was mercilessly attacking them at the moment. If they wanted to go over and support the big red pill, they had to get rid of this guy's attacks first. So they had to spend some time to solve the problem here. The above communication time was about 1 minute. This was not a long time. But for the mutant, it was already long enough. While communicating, Zhang Yi did not pause for a second in his attack on Daikami Benimaru. When his sword did not kill Daikami Benimaru, he realized that his grasp of power was still a bit weak. Not being able to control his power well had instead allowed him to survive. But this was somewhat reasonable. The top expert of Neon was not just a title. Here, it is necessary to mention again the relationship between the ability index and combat power. This is not an absolutely equivalent relationship. The ability index represents the strength of one's comprehensive abilities, not combat power. When a real battle occurs, it will also be affected by intelligence preparation, previous layout, ability restraint, environmental factors, as well as weapons and equipment and personal combat ability. This is why Jin Xia, with 9,500 ability index points, was killed in seconds by Azure Dragon, who had 9,800 points. However, Hers Hit, with 9,600 points, was able to overwhelm the entire Sky Dragon pirates, causing heavy casualties and forcing them to flee in disgrace. The reason why the great god, Vinayaka, was able to obtain the title of Amaterasu was precisely because of his absolute might in actual combat. This was because Amaterasu represented the god of the neon high heavens. If he was not powerful enough, he would not have been able to step on the skeletons of the strong and ascend the throne. However, this was not important to Zhang Yi. He only knew that when this guy was lured by him and chased after him alone, this guy was already a dead man. Zhang Yi did not waste any time. He did not even have time to say another word to the great god Huan. Instead, he directly raised his hand and summoned 10 huge and invisible dimensional gates within a 3-kilometer radius around him. The remaining 2 were incarnations of the 2 realms' junctions to protect his true body. In an instant, he had done all this. He took out the white eagle in his left hand and shot the bullets at Daikami Benimaru like a rainstorm. Of course, Daikami Benimaru could feel the terrifying power contained within the rain of bullets. The holy silver bullets, which had been blessed with precision shot, had Mach-level speed and could reach a maximum speed of 10 times the speed of sound. But Daikami Benimaru's swordsmanship was no joke either. When he raised his hand and unsheathed his sword, the moment the blade left the sheath, its shape could no longer be seen. All that could be seen was a chaotic stream of light in the air, dancing like countless cherry blossoms. Dang dang dang. All the bullets were cut down by Kunamitsu Nagamune. Zhang Yi's attacks did not stop for even a moment. The holy judgment in his right hand exploded with the powerful power of the void, transforming into a black flame of the void that surrounded the sky and swept towards Ogami Benimaru. Whoosh! The great god Hongwon instantly backed away hundreds of meters. After 2 rounds of attacks, he did not feel panic, but instead, a smile of excitement appeared at the corner of his mouth. I see, as long as I master your abilities, chaos is actually not that scary. Zhang Yi's battle with Baldeo was a battle in which he had revealed almost all of his trump cards. Although he successfully beheaded Baldeo, he also revealed his own abilities at the same time. The Columbia Navy Center immediately passed on his information, and even the images of the battle at the time, directly to every mutant in the Allied forces. In this way, when they encountered Zhang Yi, they would not need to wastefully expend their energy trying to test Zhang Yi's abilities. They could even seize the initiative on the battlefield. Chapter 1003, Ama no Mirakumo. On the side of the great god Hongwon, the battle with Zhang Yi began at the same time. In the Columbia Navy Command Center, Neon simultaneously sent a message and image to General Horn. He immediately took over the communication and command. Amaterasu. Don't be overly afraid of chaos. His abilities are mainly defensive, and his offensive abilities are not very strong. Be on the lookout for his sudden attacks from shifting his position in midair. Then buy some time and wait for reinforcements. Susanoo and Medusa will be there soon. They had personally witnessed how Baldeo was worn down and killed by Zhang Yi. It was more accurate to say that Baldeo was killed not by Zhang Yi, but by his desire to kill Zhang Yi, which caused him to inject the X compound and be dragged to death by Zhang Yi. In that battle, Zhang Yi had shown the origin of his title of absolute defense, and was indeed a master at attrition warfare. However, his attack power was not that impressive. It gave the impression that his defensive power might already be on the level of Epsilon. However, the price he paid for this was a weak attack power. According to the evaluation of the Data Analysis Agency of the Command Center, Zhang Yi's offensive power was roughly around 9,600. He was only good at relying on his formidable defense to grind his opponent little by little until they died. However, this time, the great god Hongwon did not appear on this battlefield alone. He was not afraid of stalling for time. The heart of the great god Hongwon suddenly felt more confident. He even wanted to try and see just how good the formidable chaos in front of him really was. Chaos, you have caused chaos on Star Island and stirred up countless disputes. I, Amaterasu, have long wanted to learn from you. Zhang Yi's mouth curled up in a sneer, and the holy silver bullets in his hands did not stop for a moment, shooting towards the great god Hongwon like an outpouring. The scene before him did not surprise him. This was the situation he was bound to face after the leak of intelligence. Swish! Before the bullet train had finished, Zhang Yi disappeared in midair and appeared on the right side of Daishin Hongwon the next moment. The holy judgment in his right hand was swung downwards at his head. Daishin Hongwon knew that Zhang Yi would use such a move, so he was always on his guard. Neon samurai training included methods for refining the heart. As the successor of the Divine Dragon Heartless School, he would lock himself in the dojo room every day and meditate for 2 hours to strengthen his will and sharpen his focus. He sensed Zhang Yi's sword just as it poked out of thin air. Swish! Guoguang's long sword turned into a silver streak. Before he could even turn his head, his sword was already pointed at Zhang Yi's holy judgment. Clang! The 2 treasured swords clashed fiercely, deafening. Zhang Yi was actually sent reeling backwards, and he used Space Shuffle to run thousands of meters away. Looking at his somewhat numb right hand, Zhang Yi's mouth curled up into a helpless smile. As expected, no matter how much I train, at least at the physical level, I am still far inferior to someone who is good at hand-to-hand combat. He was already certain that the other party had grasped most of his abilities. After successfully repelling Zhang Yi with this blow, the eyes of the excited great god Hongwon began to bloodshot. He had actually repelled chaos. Ha ha ha, as expected, after figuring out your abilities, you're not that strong. Zhang Yi calmly glanced at him, but only said indifferently, you're right. After you figured out my abilities, my advantage over you is not as great. But that doesn't mean that you're stronger than me, does it? Zhang Yi's eyes became dark, and a ray of dark light began to flicker in the center of his left eye, while a misty white light began to distort in the center of his right eye. With a turn of the blade in his hand, 10-dimensional gates had already surrounded the great god Hongwan in the center. Above the holy judgment, the power of the void began to surge and condense. The power of the void was very powerful, but it was also extremely unstable. If not used properly, it could even turn against its master. That was why Zhang Yi was always extremely careful when using it. For example, he had always only dared to use the move Condense the Void, as a long-range attack. He was afraid to use it up close against an enemy. But now, the situation had undergone some subtle changes. His mastery of the power of the void had become more and more proficient, and with the development of the 12-fold dimensional gate skill, his playstyle had also become more diverse. God Red Pills saw the holy judgment in Zhang Yi's hands and felt the heart-stopping power. He thought to himself, what a terrifying power, but his close combat strength is not strong. I just need to concentrate and avoid his attacks. The blade of the void condensed the power of the void and turned into a dark starry sky, appearing behind the blade of the holy judgment. Zhang Yi's eyes were cold and terrifying, and he raised his hand and slashed out 12 times in a row. The terrifying void slash appeared and disappeared in midair. But at the same time, it appeared in all directions around the great god Hongwan. Net of heaven. The 12-dimensional gates were connected, so Zhang Yi's attack, after entering the dimensional space through one door, could appear from any of the other 11 doors. There was no pattern, so it was impossible to predict. Even though the great god Vinayaka was prepared, the use of abilities in battle was inherently unpredictable. It was like an ancient martial artist sparring with each other. Even if they knew each other's martial arts styles perfectly, there was no guarantee that they could anticipate each other's moves. More than 10 void slashes surrounded the great god Vinayaka like a net. The great god Vinayaka's pupils contracted, and he felt the immense power contained within this move. At this moment, he was completely blocked and had no way out. He could only choose one direction and force his way through. Okami Benimaru clutched the long sword in his hands. Dong dong. A throbbing sound like a heartbeat came from his palm and also from the sword of Nagamune Kunamitsu. Amakusa Cloud Sword. Suddenly, a layer of crimson light covered the sword of Nagamune Kunamitsu, and the shape of the sword body became even more archaic. Daijin Benimaru drew his sword and sent out the most fierce slash at the several void slashes coming from the front. A dazzling crimson light, as if a ghost had appeared in the world, collided with the void slashes. Rumble. The enormous energy impact directly exploded out a shocking shockwave. The dazzling light made it difficult to see the situation in the middle of the battlefield, but it was only possible to see the surrounding poisonous miasma quickly rolling back out. After a moment, Dashin Hongwan stood still on the ground. His body shook a little, and he was a little unsteady, and a trace of blood overflowed from the corner of his mouth. But by relying on a desperate fight, he had survived after all. Chapter 1004, The Three Sacred Artifacts. Daishin Hongwan withstood Zhang Yi's net of heaven attack. Blood was spilling from the corners of his mouth, his internal energy was surging non-stop, and the powerful force surging through his body made him feel like his internal organs were going to come out of his throat. But now, he was increasingly fearless. Because he felt that although Zhang Yi was stronger than him, he definitely could not kill him in a short period of time. And this period of time was already enough for Haichanv and Christina to come to his aid. By then, the three of them fighting one would have an absolute advantage. However, he did not expect that just when he thought he had blocked Zhang Yi's first attack, the second round immediately followed. Zhang Yi's long sword in his hand swept, and more than a dozen void blades surged towards him from the front, back, left, right, and above. You're quite pleased to have barely blocked my ping-a, aren't you? Zhang Yi let out a sigh, not knowing where the confident smile on the face of the great god Hongwan was coming from. The net of heaven and earth was merely a means of using the dimensional gate to focus his slash in one place. He could use it once, and naturally he could use it 100 times. But why was the neon guy in front of him so excited just because he had blocked his ping A? Zhang Yi didn't quite understand. The face of the great god, Benimaru, turned pale. Only then did he realize how much he had misjudged the strength of chaos. Even if he understood the opponent's abilities, what good would that do? In the face of an absolute power gap, and without the ability to restrain the opponent, he was still going to be beaten. Yada no Kagami. At the critical moment, Benimaru, the great god, formed a hand seal with his right hand and shouted. Behind him, a simple, dark bronze mirror suddenly slowly emerged. The mirror surface had completely turned black, and there was nothing sacred about it. On the contrary, it made Zhang Yi feel a bit ugly. Yada no Kagami, is this one of Neon's famous 3 sacred artifacts? The craftsmanship is indeed a bit crude. A trace of blood overflowed from the corner of the angry great god Huan's mouth. The 3 sacred artifacts were supreme sacred objects in the eyes of the Neon people, bestowed by the gods. How could he not be angry when Zhang Yi denigrated them like that? Zhang Yi laughed and said, a broken mirror created from impure techniques from the Huashu kingdom of learning. Let me comment on it. What's your hurry? Daishin Huan was furious. But this was not the time to argue. As the outer mirror appeared, a ball of light shone from the mirror surface, enveloping the space around Daishin Huan like moonlight. For a moment, the void blades that struck him actually slowed down. Daiwa Kamaru took the opportunity to dodge their attacks at high speed. Some anxiety had begun to set in. Once again, they began to exchange blows. Why aren't you guys coming over here? This guy is a bit hard to deal with. Zhang Yi raised his hand and was about to attack again. However, Daiwa Kamaru didn't want to lose the initiative in the battle. This time, it was his turn to attack. With one hand, he changed his hand seal, and the brilliance of the Adagarasu mirror behind him grew. On the edge of the mirror's surface, one black magatama after another appeared, like tadpoles. Yasakani no Magatama. The Adagarasu spun rapidly, while the surrounding magatama rushed towards Zhang Yi, coming at him with great speed. The sky was full of magatama, as dazzling as a fireworks display. Zhang Yi calmly raised his hand and the white eagle shot out one silver holy bullet after another, knocking down all the magatama. After a round of fighting, Zhang Yi had forced almost all of the trump cards of the great god, Akamaru, out. He calmly thought to himself, this kid has shown 3 abilities. Ama no Mirakumo no Tsurugi was supposed to be a strong main attack ability that could strengthen his slashes. The Yada no Kagami could affect the speed of movement of objects within a certain range, but it did not seem to affect the time of objects, as it itself did not change. The Yasakani no Magatama had an AoE attack that did not deal much damage. Zhang Yi was not panicked. Even though he knew that the opponent still had 2 helpers nearby, he was not in the least bit anxious. When people encounter an emergency situation, they will always subconsciously become nervous. But being nervous will not help you in any way, and it will instead increase the probability of you making a mistake. So no matter what the situation, the first thing you need to do is calm yourself down and never panic, provided, of course, that you are strong enough. Zhang Yi was not an offensive-oriented mutant, so usually when facing a mutant with a similar strength, he could not achieve a quick kill like Billy the Kid or the Azure Dragon. But then again, he was not the only one around. Daishin Huan was desperately swinging his katana to block the holy silver bullets shot by Zhang Yi. His attention was focused entirely on Zhang Yi. Because at any moment, Zhang Yi might use his spatial power to instantly teleport behind him, above him, to his sides, or even under his feet, to launch an attack. Because of this, he dared not take his attention off Zhang Yi for even a moment. However, due to the high level of mental tension, he had forgotten something. Columbia Navy Command Center. Horn and the others could see Zhang Yi fighting Daishin Kurenai. However, as they watched, Horn's brow suddenly furrowed. Was there something we forgot? The other officers looked at each other, not sure what Horn was getting at. Horn ran a hand over his chin. I feel like our attention has been on chaos the whole time. There was something else. As he said this, Horn suddenly remembered what it was. He shouted, "Amaterasu, look out! He's got help!" But it was too late. When Amaterasu heard these words, a gust of wind hit her from behind. He was surrounded by a dense hail of holy silver bullets, forcing him to keep moving. But he sensed danger behind him. The Amaterasu suddenly burst into a magnificent radiance, completely enveloping the area around his body for hundreds of meters. Flower's huge body appeared behind him. Due to the radiance of the Amaterasu, its speed became somewhat slower, but it was still rushing towards Okami Benimaru at a very high speed. One in front of the other, both with deadly attacks, and the body of Okami Benimaru's body was covered in sweat. He knew he couldn't fight back, so he desperately expanded the domain of the Yata no Kagami to slow down the attacks of Zhang-Yi and Flower, and then rolled over to the side in a dismal manner. Puh! 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 It was not easy to dodge Zhang-Yi's bullets. He tried his best to escape, but he was shot in the left shoulder, thigh, and lower abdomen. Dai Shinhongwan couldn't help but yell in the communication channel, "Assholes! What are you doing? Why aren't you here yet?" Just as Flower was about to turn around and bite him to death, a long shout came from afar. A figure of crimson rushed over like a streak of light. Another huge blood-spotted snake king lay in front of Flower, its cold, vertical pupils fixed on it, its eyes full of provocation. Chapter 1005, 3 against 1. At the critical moment, Hai Chanv and Christina finally arrived. Darren Hongwan had been hit by 3 bullets, and although they were not vital, his face was rapidly turning black. Every bullet Zhang used was laced with poison. If it pierced the skin, it would quickly cause the opponent to die of poisoning. If the Shinhongwan had not taken an antidote every day, he would not have been able to suppress the terrifying poison at this time. Seeing his companions arrive on the battlefield, he said with a gloomy face, "Why did you guys come now? If you had come a little later, I was afraid I was going to die." Dai Chaishan cautiously stared at Zhang Yi and explained to the Shinhongwan, "We encountered a little trouble over there. We didn't expect that big guy to be so tough. We didn't manage to capture him, so we came to save you." Christina surveyed Zhang Yi with seductive eyes while speaking to the Shinhongwan in a contemptuous tone. "Who would have thought that you wouldn't last even a few minutes? You've been beaten up so badly already." The Shinhongwan quickly injected himself with a powerful antidote to suppress the poison on the bullet. Then he gave himself another shot of adrenaline to boost his condition and prepare for the siege of Zhang-Yi that was to follow. He took a deep breath. "That's easy for you to say, but it's not easy to fight him one-on-one." The 3 of them stood in a shape, and the one in the front was the woman with the lowest ability index, Atsuchi. Now it's 3 against 1, and the situation is completely different. The 3 of them complemented each other's abilities, especially the veteran partners, Kamui and Umi Shiojo, whose combined combat power had increased by a huge margin. Most importantly, they also complemented each other's strengths and covered each other's weaknesses. As for Flower, she was stopped by the huge blood-spotted Snake King. Zhang Yi watched them coldly. Although he had not been able to finish off Kamui within a few minutes, his goal had been achieved. At the moment, Dashin Hongwan has at least 30% of his combat effectiveness lost, and the internal injuries he sustained will shorten the time he can fight in the field. He has gained the upper hand in a fight against 3. Everyone in the Columbia Navy's command center is also intently watching this battle. This trio represents the extremely high combat effectiveness of the Allied forces. If they can take down Chaos, it will greatly increase the chances of the Allied forces capturing the Source of God. At that time, as long as they can eliminate the 4 spirits in the East Sea region, they can say that they are guaranteed to win. But, can they really defeat him? Lieutenant Colonel Clutie said with some lack of confidence. Zhang Yi had already killed 2 members of the Hell's Chain, and his strength had been deeply imprinted in everyone's hearts. In particular, his perverted defensive capabilities had once made people feel desperate. Now, the joint forces had reached a consensus. Zhang Yi's attack methods were not terrifying. What was terrifying was his almost unsolvable defensive capabilities. If there was no way to break through, they would only be able to be dragged to death. However, Horn calmly said, "We should trust them." He looked at Kruti and the other officers. Both Krishna and Amaterasu and Susanu are strong people who have survived countless life and death battles to stand out. They know how to deal with the guy in front of them. Horn was right. After the three learned that their opponent was Zhang Yi, they each began to plan their battle strategies in their minds. 3 against 1, in a triangle formation. In Zhang Yi's mind, the information he had learned from Thor also surfaced. Christina, codenamed Medusa, had a pupil technique that could seal the mobility of others. This was considered the only useful piece of information. As for the rest, he was not sure. As for the abilities of the Neon Mutants, Thor knew even less. However, based on his combat experience, the current Susanu was definitely a master of close combat. Otherwise, he would not have been made the main attacker. Zhang Yi slowly narrowed his eyes. In this battle, he was at a disadvantage in terms of intelligence. Therefore, he could not act rashly, to avoid falling into the opponent's ability trap. The three of them had already begun discussing their battle strategy on the communication channel. Daishin Benimaru wiped the blood from the corner of his mouth and said, "His spatial abilities are too unpredictable. He can attack and retreat as he pleases. We must neutralize his abilities before we can fight him. However, if we think about it positively, his attack power is limited. As long as we maintain a certain level of strength, and even if we realize that things are not going well, we can immediately flee in a group, and it will be difficult for him to kill us. In short, we must not bet everything on one card like did, and end up losing our lives." At this time, Christina spoke up, "Leave it to me to seal his movements." Daishin Hongwan and Hai Taijin glanced at her. Seeing Christina's confident expression, they felt a little more at ease. "Are you sure?" "Nonsense. Don't you know who I am?" Christina snorted. Daishin Hongwan's eyes lit up. "Good, if you can seal his spatial ability." "No, even if you can just delay it for 0.1 seconds, our chances of winning will increase by more than 50%. Yes, it was an increase of 50%. Without the protection of space, Zhang Yi's personal combat power was not at all to be feared. The two of them, him and Hai Chanv, would use that 0.1 second to completely tear Zhang Yi apart. Then that's settled. "Let's do it," Christina said, and her pupils suddenly glowed with a dazzling gray-white light as they fixed on Zhang Yi. In the brief moment her eyes met Zhang Yi's, Zhang Yi felt as if all the supernatural powers within his body had become sluggish. Even his body's movements were slowing down. Even he, who had activated 30x space acceleration, had his mobility halved. And at that moment, the female ocean tide in front of the three of them suddenly rushed to Zhang Yi's side. A layer of terrifying black spots appeared on the surface of his skin, and the whole person was like a beast, with red blood gas swirling around him. The distance of a few hundred meters was like nothing to him. In just a flash, he suddenly came to Zhang Yi's side, and then smashed his right fist hard at Zhang Yi's face. The Great Tide Girl, an enhanced ability user with the ability code Blood of the Mad God. As the purest martial arts faction among the mutant factions, this faction's combat effectiveness in close combat is even sufficient to cross a large gap in the ability index, killing high-level mutants in seconds. Facing the frontal attack of the Great Tide Girl, Zhang Yi's first choice was to open the dimensional gate. However, this time, his connection within the space suddenly became incredibly sluggish.